Welcome back.
Yeah, thanks.
It's so hard to cut off our conversations and start the podcast because the podcast is about the conversations, and I want to save a lot of that good stuff for when we're on air.
We were rolling so good last time too.
Yeah, we were reflecting about how easy it was,
Yeah.
how much we enjoyed it, and how we went for 72 minutes without any prompts or anything. It was just really natural.
I was impressed.
Yeah.
Especially with you. You didn't have any papers. You didn't have anything yet to prompt you.
I do like to talk. Talking is kind of my superpower. I do like to talk. And actually, when I started my counseling training, I mean, talking I already had. I had to improve on listening. So this is a good balance of being able to talk and listen for me. Yeah, it was good.
Yeah.
What'd you bring us?
So I thought I'd keep up with the items because I actually really enjoyed that last time. So this must be a Klingit basket. This is probably really old. You could see there is a canoe. Yep. They usually had those like dugout canoes. I have heard that the more people, the more rare the basket. So I've seen photographs of 7 or 8 or 9 people. Yeah. So that was one thing that I learned. So this one only has 3. It looks like. Yeah, 3. And then you can see a little duck crest on the side. And you can see, if you want to just take a closer look, you can see the work that went in and the braids that went into this basket.
So what's the material mostly?
It could be cedar. So
that's what this looks like.
It could be. It probably most likely is a cedar woven basket.
I don't know that I've ever held one.
Yeah, it is so beautiful.
They're the kind of thing that you see behind the rail at the Victoria Museum there. And yet you were talking about before, having control over your own artifacts as a people has been important too. So and this was in a museum of some kind.
Yes, so this item was repatriated. Yes. And we're starting to push more for that. I actually have a friend who is she does that actually. So she's studying for her PhD right now. And she talks about that, about repatriating our cultural items. Many Inuit items are actually in the British Museum. Right. So they're not even over here. Yeah. So
that's beautiful.
What I wanted to say too about weaving baskets, like these are since time immemorial. These items were made. They had a purpose. I think that you can identify which family who made this. They would be able to go back just by these. And this was dyed. I mean, these accents here are dyed. Okay, and then there's a very ethical way of gathering the cedar. So right now it's big. People are over harvesting cedar. There's a lot of non-Indigenous folks who are getting into basket making, and it can be quite the process. So I am the caretaker for this basket for now. And then I brought one more basket. This one is mine. This one was
look how pretty.
This one was a gift actually. This basket is so special to me. This is a Secwepemc berry picking basket.
It's gorgeous. Can you show the inside?
Yeah, absolutely.
It's got the pretty birch bark.
The birch bark,
which is almost pink in color.
That's from my berries, because I actually do take this basket berry picking. So I used to take my Secwepemc friends berry picking in the mountains. I'd be walking around with my little yogurt container, my little plastic yogurt container, dumping my berries into a plastic bucket. They'd all be out there with their birch bark baskets. You actually wrap this around your waist, and so you can use both your hands while you're picking. Some of the kids that we would go berry picking with, they'd have little tiny birch bark baskets like this big. You'd have kids we're always have a system when we bring children with us berry picking out on the land, we'd have a system of, we'd usually have a fire and then food set up. And then there was always one adult by the fire watching the kids and making sure. So it was a beautiful, it's my favorite memories. So the one day we left, I went back home, good haul. One of the practices too that I learned from Secwepemc was that because I took them up berry picking, everybody at the end of the day, we'd all get together when we were getting ready to leave, and everybody would come over to my little plastic bin and dump a bit of portion of theirs into my basket. Yeah. I didn't know. I was like, what is everyone doing? And it was their way of thanking me for taking them to a berry picking spot that I showed to them. Like
showing someone your fishing hole.
It is. It's an honor. It absolutely is. Sure. However, for me, it was an honor just to bring Secwepemc onto their own Secwepemc lands. And I knew places where everybody could fill their baskets, and there's still plenty left over.
What kind of berries were you doing?
So the Secwepemc word for huckleberry is wanach, and highbush blueberry is sasap. And so I learned that from my Secwepemc friends. So they gifted me this basket after a couple years of picking with my yogurt containers. My girlfriend finally came over and gifted me her father's berry picking basket. And he has gone to the happy hunting ground. So it was a incredible honor to be gifted their father's berry picking basket. And, you know, immediately she's holding it and she had tears in her eyes. And I was like, immediately, I just want to say, no, but that is that's not the Indigenous ways to reject a gift. I had to accept it. Yes. You don't want to insult anybody. So it's been one of my most prized possessions. And when I go berry picking, that is one of the times that I feel closest to my culture. I might not be actually picking the berries that my grandmother picked, but that act of just being so fully engaged with this plant, this living plant. And I pick clean like my grandmother. You look at everybody else's. Everyone else has all the bush shrapnel in it, but I have just berries in mine. Yeah. So my mom's like, you pick like your grandmother. Okay. So that act of being just deep in the bush and kind of like so focused on the juicy one. Sure. That's when I feel so close to the land and to my culture.
Well, and I remember you saying when I interviewed you for the... what was very helpful for you in your healing process, and you said the land itself. And we're going to be talking about culture as treatment. Yeah. And you always say like the land itself is healing.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Just hearing you say it like that, I thought that actually driving out here, I was looking at the trees and just watching how they were moving in the wind, and just it's so hard to explain, but I said last week, the land remembers our feet. Yeah. The land remembers our feet. All cultures across the world were at one time deeply connected with their lands. Not just Indigenous folks, people all over the world, cultures all across the world were deeply connected to their lands. It lived off of the land, respected the land, lived by principles of protecting the land because it provides for us.
Yeah. And so while the land is healing, being disconnected from the land is also connected to illness.
Absolutely.
And what it's making me think of is our youngest son we were just saying, I just got a call from him. He's down on the Lower Mainland just visiting, and he was downtown quite a bit. And he said to me, Mom, I feel like people are sick here. And I was like, well, what do you mean? And he was kind of in the downtown part. He said they got the headphones in and they... that, and he said probably some of them are doing okay, but I feel like they're just there's something lost here. And it's funny hearing just like a 21-year-old kid feeling some kind of a sense of like a disconnection, and I think we talked lots about it. It's funny when your kid leaves your basement suite, you actually have a ton to talk about. And he was saying, I just to be disconnected, and in a way I think that's what you're talking about. All of us suffer from being disconnected from the land.
Yeah. Well, you raised your family here.
Yeah.
And you all spent a great deal of time on the land and with the horses, dogs, all of it.
Absolutely.
So that connection would be more embedded with him. So that's great that he has that. But he's absolutely right. I just learned in history, we're focusing mostly history on the Yukon and the Northwest Territories, but that building of that Alaska Highway, the elders really said that really marked out of all the events. There was a fur trading. Indigenous peoples did really well during the fur trading period. The Klondike Gold Rush, it started that colonization that really started to push back Indigenous peoples dispossess them from their lands. But then that Alaska Highway, that was the one thing that really drove that wedge. And I listened to some elders talk about it, and they said that was what marked the end of the old ways. It was that access and all the people coming in, and prior to that, they didn't really drive around. Nobody was driving around. So this highway and this concept of everybody having their own vehicles and bringing, so they really moved Indigenous peoples. So they started to build these central hubs where people, now they're moving people off of the land and saying, you got to come live here. You got to come to Carcross, or, these places, and that dispossession of people off their lands. And so that reconnection to homelands or to just the land at all. I mean, I find comfort in being on the land here. It's not my territory, but I know that the land holds me. It still holds me. It holds us all if we just listen. So that's why I don't understand people who are so disrespectful to the land and do things to harm it. That is inherently, ever since I was a little girl, that was deeply embedded in me, so much so that nobody taught me that. That was just already there. I was like, what are you doing? Why are you cutting down all my trees beside my house? That was already in me from a young age. Yeah.
Interesting. Again, a tangent we go on without.
I know.
Without any.
Yeah.
It's really good though.
Yeah.
I wanted to recap what we talked about last time.
Yeah.
And we've had a chance to visit in between. I mean, I just don't think there's any avoiding that. We just have so much to say. We have so many words.
We do. Yeah.
So we talk about how well the message that kind of came out was there's a big gap between if you've been trained in westernized psychology, which I was, and that's how we connected more recently, was me working my way through my training as a psychologist, interviewing you in a cross-cultural class. What I thought was interesting, I just had pulled out some notes from my paper, is there's actually a phenomena called cloaking. I don't know if you've come across it. So cloaking strategies.
Okay, tell me about it.
Well, what it is that it's it's really quite consistent across people that we tend to believe we're more culturally aware than we are in real life. And that we will say that we're kind of immune to, we regard ourselves as more culturally sensitive than we are, more culturally aware, more, and this is kind of a general thing.
Yeah.
And that as a mental health professional, we might be prone to overestimate our level of cultural competency within practice. And even though I wasn't quite licensed at that time, absolutely, that was my case. And not only really overestimating, but being a little oblivious to the depth of what we were dealing with, but then also aware that there was a gap, that being trained in westernized psychology is a gap. Like it's this chasm that needs to be to meet the needs of the Indigenous client. And that was our first conversations were about that. And it was great. And so you were sharing in our last podcast, 3 times were unsuccessful. You know, you were desperate for help, you reached out for help, and it wasn't a good fit for you. And then the 4th time you got us. So you go into that. So if people want more detail, they can go back and hear some more of those details. But I was also reading that you're right on point statistically, Jolene, because Because Indigenous clients are twice as likely to never return to counseling after their first encounter. And statistically, I don't know what it is. We'll put the references in the show notes for that. But statistically, they're because of systemic racism, the impacts of a colonialized system, there's a disproportionate amount of mental health challenges within the Indigenous community. Yeah. And yet, if they go to a counselor, they're twice as likely to never return. So that's pretty daunting.
Yeah. So before we move on, beyond that, I just want to again say I had messaged you, I think, over the weekend and had said something along the lines of, I don't know how anybody in the healthcare would be able to, not just mental health care, but healthcare period.
Yes.
Okay, because our health has been greatly impacted by colonization. So I don't know how anyone in the healthcare work field could help fully and encompass completely without having basic knowledge of the history and contemporary events of Indigenous peoples that affected us before, what our families went through, what we have to do, and now what we have to deal with now. So just to highlight that, because there's many perforations in Western centered healing practices.
I like that word, perforations.
No, it's my new favorite when I'm talking
That's
about
a good one. Love it.
Yeah.
So that's what it is.
Yeah. So I can see why. I know why we don't go back, because that is a large gap there. It's huge. So my mom, I can talk about her from a perspective of her daughter. She didn't go back. I think she's twice she tried and she's never gone back. Yeah. And still has not.
Yeah, and that's daunting, and that's what our conversation has been, and it's ongoing, and it's changing. So when you and I talk as freely as we do, we run into spots where, we just run out of knowledge, or there's this, the chasm widens, right, and then it comes closer together, and we get really excited, and then it widens, and that's why I think these conversations are not only fun, I think they have a lot of value.
They do.
And me, I just think I have questions. And sometimes when you bring stuff, I'm like, I have no idea what you're talking about, Jolene. Let's talk about it when we're recording, because I think I represent a lot of, in healthcare or mental health care, of maybe thinking, I am culturally aware or understanding what it's like for an Indigenous client, and really just not there, not far enough. So that's good.
Yeah, that's why we're here.
Yeah,
and that's why I'm here. Actually, aside that, I really like you, Devaney. Yes. Aside from that, that's why I'm fond of each other. That's why I'm here. Ultimately, though, is because one of my main questions, one of my first questions, is what does this do to benefit my community and the communities of Indigenous peoples? How does this work? Yeah. Okay, and the thing is that I feel like these podcasts are still for non-Indigenous folks. They're for them. They're for them to listen to. Hopefully they will learn something, then they'll benefit that, and then somehow wherever that leads will benefit even one Indigenous person. Then the work is worth it for me. Oh,
that's good. And you do make it easy because you're passionate and you're authentic. And
good. So those are good things.
Those are good things. And we're fond of each other.
Yes, we are.
Which is great. Yes. So culture as treatment is what I kind of want to get into a little bit more, because there's a lot of that I guess if I'm to speak freely, you can have if you don't understand the culture deeply, and you don't understand the perforations, then you're going to be hanging dream catchers.
Yes, please don't. Yes. For real.
Yeah, for real.
Yeah.
That's the danger. And
Yes.
think you're somehow being there. So there's that. Understanding why westernized psychology does miss the mark, miss the need, miss the, not only intellectually but in practice. And the westernized psychology is going to focus on intellectual study and practice. Okay, like
Yeah.
and yet, and they've excluded or dismissed Indigenous knowledge and practice and knowing.
Yeah.
You do talk a lot about that.
Yes.
So it puts someone training in the field of psychology professionally in a bit of a pickle.
Yeah.
Because you are relied on to, it's only the research papers that are getting the right. Can you speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, well, that's what I feel like I come across a lot of times. We talk about it more and more in school now, so that's encouraging to be talking about it, because one person who's sitting there has their master's or their PhD or whatever their degree is, and the person who actually knows what they need deeply, or maybe they need guidance, is going to fall short. They're going to still miss that facet of culture. Yeah. So, and I don't know how a person, like, say if a person, I don't want to say with less awareness, but maybe someone who's younger and doesn't completely understand even what happened to them or their family or how colonization affected them. Like, again, then we're really still failing them.
Yeah.
We're still failing them because this non-Indigenous counselor has also just missed that. And it might just go to systemic, just think systemically instead of culturally.
Well, I've experienced that too with my attempts of being sensitive to my Indigenous clients. And they were isolated from their own culture. They didn't have a sense of what intergenerational trauma had done to them.
Yeah.
Didn't know the word. And when I described, that, the things that may have happened, and they had that, but they didn't have a sense of how it was impacting them today. So in a way that like an intellectualizing of that doesn't train the therapist well, but it also, the Indigenous person who's young or doesn't have opportunity. Yeah. They're not understanding themselves.
Absolutely. I was there. I was also there for a long time. I was there. Last year when we spoke, we touched on identity. And then I think last week we ended with identity. And now I just get to be, right? We ended that way and I loved that. Yeah. However, at one time I was not there. Didn't understand. I didn't understand what my mom had gone through. And even growing up with her, not entirely understanding what is this? But not asking the questions, you're a young person and you're just moving through this. You're just going along. And so is she. Now looking back on it, I'm the age that she was when I was a young girl, 5, 6 years old, my youngest now. So I was, so now I'm looking at it through this lens and I'm like, wow, that's profound. Yeah.
And this stage of understanding that is almost the scaffolding for healing. I would say that's probably a true statement, that we do need to understand to a point in order to heal on both sides.
Absolutely. Yeah. So, but that work, sometimes people are not ready to move towards that quite yet. They might not admit that, and that's okay.
Yes. Yeah.
But we will move through that when we're ready to.
Yeah. And as a non-Indigenous counselor in that role with, say a client who's Indigenous but not really processing some of the impacts of the things that have happened, I'm not bringing it up to them, but it sure doesn't hurt for me to have an awareness.
For sure.
Even though it's not for me to say or impose or.
I like that.
Yeah. But still, it's.
I like that.
It's good to know.
Yeah, I like that. Yeah. That's important.
We wanted to talk more about culture as treatment, and you've talked about the land, but you've also talked the different ways that when your counselor, the fourth counselor, who was an older Indigenous woman, connected with you in ways that were, just fit.
Oh,
they fit for you as an
she
older
knew
woman.
My family, yeah.
She was in your home.
Yep.
Like that was just powerful learning for me.
Yeah, she's a survivor of the 60 scoop, and so knew my family well, actually. Yeah.
And she's also, as a therapist, navigating the code of ethics that is required to be licensed in the system.
Yep.
So I'm really curious about that. But in terms of actual culture, as your healing and your culture together, can you talk a little bit about that?
So I'm also not living on my homelands.
Yes.
So that's a difficult one. I've struggled with that for years. It is still a struggle sometimes. I miss deeply where I'm from.
Tell where you're from in case people are not hearing the last one.
Yeah. So
a little recap.
My mom was born in Aklavik. It's pronounced Aklavik in the Northwest Territories. It's a place of the grizzly. Lots of grizzlies up north. It's this little sort of like, I think they call them, it's like on a little peninsula on the land. She wasn't there for very long. She misses it so deeply. Okay. Yeah. She was moved to Inuvik. So we are Inuvialuit. My family is from the far Northwest Territories, the west of the Northwest Territories. And then my grandfather was Alaskan Inupiat. Okay. So, but I grew up down here. I was born and raised down here. Yeah. But I always loved the land.
Yeah. Down here is the Robson Valley.
Yeah, it's so beautiful here. Yeah. So we are on Secwepemc territory. I think right here, actually, where you are, you're bordering Secwepemc and the Lheidli territory. So you're actually on a so another thing with borders is that our borders were not rigid all the time. Okay, like sometimes during times of warfare or just prosperity, our borders would get bigger or get smaller. So here the Lheidli and the Secwepemc assert that this is their territory. They probably both assert that this is their territory, and they're not wrong in doing that. Yeah. That's a historical, So it's not this like rigid border like Western borders are, like over in Alberta or in Saskatchewan and so on. But the pull for me really began in the last 5 or 6 years. So when I look back on the timeline of accessing healing for myself through counseling, but also through inner work, that really began heavily for me. I always had something deeply calling me, though. Okay. I could never really quite put words to what that was. There's a word for it. I'll look it up and I'll tell you next time. But there's something called missing places that you've never been. Okay. And I'd have like dreams about places or this deep pull, and I still feel it all the time now, more so now that I've actually been onto my homelands. I feel this deep pull to the Beaufort Sea in that area. So I was lucky to grow up with my mom having her artwork around us. We come from a family of prolific artists. We've got singers, we've got actors, carvers, painters. My mom does pointillism. Myself, I like to write. I do artwork, but I like to write a lot of I like words. So those things that is a part of our culture. So luckily I was surrounded by that growing up. We'd go visit my auntie. She was a phenomenal artist. I got to go see my auntie Mona up in the Yellowknife, Northwest Territories. And her artwork is well known in the north. She's the one who painted, there's a little igloo church in Inuvik. She did all the painting. So kind of like the Catholic priests commissioned her. It's like what they do in the cathedrals in Italy or whatever, all up top. So we come from a family of distinguished artists. So that is connected to our culture deeply. There was something that no matter what they went through, they held that.
Even though you weren't connected to your land per se, your experience culture
Yes.
through.
Yeah, our family held onto it no matter what.
Yeah.
Yes, no matter what happened, they were holding on to these things.
Yeah.
So luckily I had that influence. I had these amazing, my auntie could make the most beautiful Inuk parkas.
Okay.
She could make the most beautiful, we call them gamik. People know them maybe as mukleks, but gamik and mitts, anything. She was a master seamstress. Okay. So I was lucky to see all this growing up.